Let's take a gentle journey back in time, back to ancient Rome, where history whispers through the cobblestones and the warm Mediterranean sun casts long shadows across marble columns. Fact 1. The founding legend. Our story begins with a legend, as all great stories do. According to Roman tradition, the city of Rome was founded on April 21st, in the year 753 BCE. The Romans celebrated this date every year with a festival called Perilia. Imagine spring flowers blooming on the 7 hills, and people gathering to honor their city's birthday, a tradition that would continue for over 1,000 years. Fact 2. Romulus and Remus. The founding myth tells us of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants and nursed by a she-wolf in a cave on the Palatine Hill. Picture that wolf, protective and gentle, caring for these 2 small children by the banks of the Tiber River. Eventually, shepherds found the boys and raised them. When they grew up, the brothers decided to build a city on the spot where they'd been saved. After a dispute, Romulus became the first king, and the city took his name, Rome. Fact 3. The 7 hills. Rome wasn't built on just any land. It rose up across 7 distinct hills: the Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Celian. Each hill had its own character, its own neighborhoods, its own stories. The Palatine Hill was where the wealthy built their homes, their gardens overlooking the Forum below. Even today you can walk those hills and feel the layers of history beneath your feet, like pages in an ancient book. Fact 4. From monarchy to republic. For its first 2.5 centuries, Rome was ruled by kings. 7 kings in all, each adding something to the city's foundation. But in 509 BCE, the Romans overthrew their last king, Tarquin the Proud, and established a republic. They were tired of tyranny, weary of one man holding all the power. So they created something new, a government where elected officials called consuls would serve for just 1 year, where the Senate would advise and where citizens had a voice. This republic would last nearly 500 years. Fact 5. The Roman Forum. At the heart of ancient Rome lay the Forum, a bustling rectangular plaza nestled between those ancient hills. This was where Romans gathered daily, where temples stood alongside government buildings, where merchants sold their wares and senators debated the future of their republic. The Forum was more than just a marketplace or meeting place. It was the beating heart of Roman life, alive with voices and footsteps from dawn until dusk. Fact 6. All roads lead to Rome. The Romans were master builders, and nowhere was this more evident than in their roads. They constructed over 250,000 miles of roads throughout their empire, linking distant provinces to the capital. These weren't simple dirt paths. They were engineering marvels, built in layers with drainage systems, sturdy enough that some are still in use today 2,000 years later. The phrase "all roads lead to Rome" wasn't just poetry. It was quite literally true. Every major road in the empire had its milestone distances measured from the golden milestone in the Roman Forum. Fact 7. Roman names. Roman citizens typically had 3 names, a practice called the tria nomina. There was the praenomen, your personal first name, the nomen, your family name, and the cognomen, which might describe a personal characteristic or achievement. So a man might be called Marcus Tullius Cicero, Marcus being his personal name, Tullius his family clan, and Cicero possibly referring to an ancestor who grew chickpeas, as Cicer means chickpea in Latin. These names carried history, identity, and belonging in just a few syllables. Fact 8. The Vestal Virgins. In the heart of the Forum stood the Temple of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Here, 6 priestesses called Vestal Virgins tended an eternal flame that represented the life of Rome itself. Chosen as young girls, these women served for 30 years, living lives of privilege and respect, but also tremendous responsibility. If the sacred flame ever went out, it was considered a terrible omen for the city. Day and night, through all seasons, the Vestals kept watch, keeping Rome's flame burning bright. And so, with images of sacred flames and ancient roads, of hills touched by moonlight and forums filled with the echoes of long-ago voices, we rest here, letting the story of Rome wash gently over us like warm Mediterranean waves. Our journey through Rome continues now as we walk a little further into the daily life of this ancient city, where ordinary moments held extraordinary beauty. Fact 9. The Roman calendar. The Romans gave us the calendar we still use today, though it took time to perfect. Originally, the Roman year had only 10 months beginning in March. That's why September, October, November, and December have names meaning 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, even though there are 9th through 12th months now. King Numa Pompilius added January and February, moving the new year to January 1st. Later, Julius Caesar would reform it further, creating the Julian calendar with 365 days and a leap year every 4 years. When you glance at a calendar today, you're looking at something the Romans helped shape, their gift echoing softly through time. Fact 10. Roman baths. Imagine ending your day not with a quick shower, but with a visit to the baths, a place of warmth, relaxation, and community. Roman bathhouses, called thermae, were magnificent structures where citizens could spend hours. You'd move through different rooms, first the tepidarium, a warm room to adjust. Then the caldarium, where hot water and steam enveloped you like a gentle embrace. And finally the frigidarium with its cool pools to invigorate. But the baths weren't just about bathing. People exercised, socialized, conducted business, and relaxed in gardens. The largest baths in Rome could accommodate thousands of people at once, all seeking that same peaceful restoration. Fact 11. Aqueducts, rivers in the sky. To supply water to their growing city and those magnificent baths, the Romans built aqueducts, engineering marvels that carried fresh water from mountain springs many miles away. Rome itself was served by 11 major aqueducts, some stretching over 50 miles. These weren't simple pipes, but carefully graded channels, sometimes running underground, sometimes arching gracefully across valleys on stone bridges that still stand today. Water flowed gently downhill the entire journey, using only gravity. Close your eyes and picture it, cool, clear water traveling for miles and miles, finally arriving in Rome to pour into fountains and baths, bringing life and refreshment to hundreds of thousands of people. Fact 12. Roman houses. The wealthy Romans lived in homes called domus, built around a central courtyard called an atrium. Rainwater would fall through an opening in the roof into a shallow pool below, creating a gentle sound that echoed through the house. Rooms faced inward toward this peaceful courtyard, away from the noise of the streets. The walls were painted with colorful frescoes, gardens bloomed in the peristyle, and in the warmest months the atrium provided a cool, shaded retreat. It was a design that invited calm, that separated the chaos of public life from the tranquility of home. Fact 13. Insulae, ancient apartments. But most Romans didn't live in spacious domus. The majority lived in insulae, apartment buildings that could rise 5 or 6 stories high. The wealthier tenants lived on the lower floors, where rooms were larger and access was easier. Higher up, the apartments grew smaller and simpler. These buildings lined the narrow streets of Rome, creating shadowy corridors where neighbors knew each other, where laundry hung from windows, where the sounds and smells of daily life mingled together. Life in an insula was loud, communal, intimate, a reminder that ancient Rome was a living, breathing city of ordinary people going about their ordinary days. Fact 14. Roman food. Let's wander now into a Roman kitchen as evening falls. Romans typically ate 3 meals, a light breakfast called ancientacivilizations, a small lunch called prandium, and the main meal, cena, eaten in the late afternoon. The wealthy might recline on couches around a table, but most people sat. A typical meal might include bread dipped in olive oil, vegetables, cheese, olives, and perhaps fish or meat if you could afford it. They loved garum, a fermented fish sauce used like we use salt. Imagine the warm smell of fresh bread, the taste of wine mixed with water, the simple satisfaction of a meal shared as the sun sets golden over the Tiber. Fact 15. Togas and tunics. Roman citizens wore togas for formal occasions, great semicircular woolen garments that draped elegantly over the body. But togas were heavy, cumbersome, hot in summer. For everyday life, Romans wore simpler tunics, loose garments belted at the waist, comfortable and practical. Women wore a long tunic called a stola, often with a shawl called a palla. Children ran through the streets in their little tunics, and workers wore shorter ones that allowed freedom of movement. The toga remained a symbol of citizenship and dignity, but the tunic was life, comfort, the everyday fabric of Roman existence. Fact 16. The Pantheon. Among all of Rome's temples, one stands out for its perfect beauty: the Pantheon, temple to all the gods. Built and rebuilt over centuries, the version that still stands today was completed around 126 CE. Step inside and you enter a circular room topped by the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built, a perfect hemisphere. At its center, an opening called the oculus lets in a shaft of sunlight that moves across the interior like a sundial. Rain falls through that opening too, draining away through subtle slopes in the floor. Standing beneath that dome feels like standing beneath the sky itself, held in a quiet embrace between earth and heaven. And so we linger here a moment, in the soft light falling through ancient openings, in the echo of water flowing through distant aqueducts, in the warmth of homes where families gathered as darkness fell, letting Rome's gentle rhythm carry us deeper into rest. We move forward now through the centuries as Rome grows from a city into something greater, an empire that will stretch across the known world. Fact 17. The Punic Wars. For over a century, Rome faced a formidable rival across the Mediterranean, Carthage, a powerful city in North Africa. 3 times they went to war in what became known as the Punic Wars. The Second War brought Hannibal, the brilliant Carthaginian general who did the unthinkable. He marched war elephants over the Alps, bringing his army into Italy itself. For 15 years, Hannibal campaigned through the Italian countryside. But Rome endured, patient and persistent. Eventually, they carried the war to Carthage itself, and the great general Scipio Africanus brought victory to Rome. After the Third War, Carthage was destroyed completely, and Rome stood alone as master of the Western Mediterranean. From this crucible of conflict, Rome emerged transformed, no longer just a city but the dominant power of their world. Fact 18. The Roman Legion. Rome's strength rested on the shoulders of its soldiers, the legionaries who marched in formation across 3 continents. A Roman legion consisted of about 5,000 men, divided into smaller units called cohorts and centuries. Each soldier carried a gladius, a short sword perfect for close combat, and a pilum, a throwing spear designed to bend on impact. They wore segmented armor that allowed movement, and they marched carrying their own equipment, about 60 pounds of gear, earning them the nickname Marius's mules. But more than their equipment, what made the legions formidable was their discipline, their training, their ability to work as one coordinated unit. They built roads and bridges, constructed camps each night with defensive walls, and fought with a precision that made them nearly unstoppable. Fact 19. Julius Caesar. In the 1st century BCE, a man emerged who would change Rome forever. Gaius Julius Caesar was a brilliant general, a gifted writer, and an ambitious politician. He conquered Gaul, what we now call France, in a series of campaigns that brought vast territory under Roman control. He wrote about these conquests in clear, elegant Latin that students still read today. But when the Senate ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome, Caesar made a fateful choice. With just 1 legion he crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, an act that meant civil war. "The die is cast," he reportedly said. That crossing gave us a phrase we still use today. To cross the Rubicon means to pass a point of no return, to make a decision that cannot be undone. Fact 20. The Ides of March. Caesar won his civil war and became dictator of Rome, implementing reforms and consolidating power. But a group of senators, fearing he would make himself king, conspired against him. On March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March in the Roman calendar, they surrounded him in the theater of Pompey and stabbed him 23 times. According to legend, Caesar's last words to his friend Brutus, who was among the assassins, were "Et Brute? And you, Brutus?" The assassination didn't save the Republic as the conspirators hoped. Instead, It plunged Rome into another civil war, one that would ultimately transform the Republic into an empire. Fact 21. Augustus, the first emperor. From the chaos following Caesar's death, his adopted heir Octavian emerged victorious. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and he became Rome's first emperor, though he carefully avoided that title, preferring princeps, first citizen. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, bringing peace after a century of civil wars. This peace, called the Pax Romana, would last for 2 centuries. Augustus found Rome a city of brick, it was said, and left it a city of marble. He reorganized the government, supported the arts, and established a system of rule that would endure. When he died in 14 CE, Rome was no longer a republic, it was an empire, and the age of emperors had begun. Fact 22. Roman entertainment, the gladiators. Romans loved spectacle, and nothing drew crowds like the gladiatorial games. Gladiators were mostly slaves or prisoners, trained to fight in combat for the entertainment of thousands. But these weren't simple brawls. They were skilled performances with different types of gladiators using different weapons and armor. Aretarius fought with a net and trident, trying to ensnare his opponent. A Murmillo wore a heavy helmet and carried sword and shield. The crowds would cheer, waving cloths, shouting advice. A defeated gladiator might appeal for mercy. The sponsor of the games would decide, sometimes swayed by the crowd's response. It was brutal, yes, but to the Romans it was also a display of courage, skill, and the reality of life and death. Fact 23. The Colosseum. The greatest arena of all rose in the heart of Rome itself. The Flavian Amphitheater, which we now call the Colosseum. Completed in 80 CE, it could hold 50,000 spectators, who entered through numbered archways that allowed the massive crowd to fill and empty efficiently. The floor of the arena covered a complex underground area with cages for animals, rooms for gladiators, and mechanical lifts that could raise scenery and combatants dramatically into view. The Romans could even flood the arena floor for mock naval battles. Imagine sitting in those stone seats on a warm afternoon, the roar of the crowd around you, the drama unfolding below. The Colosseum was more than a building. It was where Rome came together to see and be seen, to experience spectacle on a scale the world had never known. Fact 24. Bread and circuses. The Roman government understood something important about keeping their vast population content. People needed food and entertainment. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Rome's emperors provided free grain distributions to citizens, ensuring no one would starve. They sponsored games, races, and spectacles to keep the population entertained and distracted. It wasn't just generosity, it was practical politics. A well-fed, entertained population was less likely to riot or rebel. And so the grain ships arrived from Egypt, the bakeries worked through the night, and the arenas filled with crowds, all part of the complex machinery that kept the empire running smoothly. And so the empire settles into its rhythm. Grain ships crossing azure seas, gladiators training in the morning light, marble temples gleaming under the Mediterranean sun. Rome at the height of its power, mighty and vast, yet built from countless small moments, countless ordinary lives, all flowing together like a river toward the sea. Let us wander now through the daily rhythms of imperial Rome, where life moved at its own ancient pace, where small rituals and great achievements existed side by side. Fact 25. Roman education. Roman children from wealthy families began their education around age 7. Boys and some girls would study with a teacher called a grammaticus, learning to read and write both Latin and Greek. They studied poetry, history, and rhetoric, the art of speaking persuasively. Imagine a classroom in the early morning, young voices reciting Homer, the scratch of styluses on wax tablets, the patient correction of a teacher. Older boys might continue to study rhetoric with a reader, learning to argue cases and speak in public, skills essential for political life. Education was prized, for the Romans believed that civilization was built not just on roads and aqueducts, but on knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next. Fact 26. Roman numbers. The Romans gave us a number system we still recognize today, though it works quite differently from our Arabic numerals. Roman numerals used letters to represent values: I for 1, V for 5, X for 10, L for 50, C for 100, D for 500, and M for 1000. They combined these in clever ways. Placing a smaller number before a larger one meant subtraction, so 4 meant 4 while 6 meant 6. We still see these numbers today on clock faces, in book chapters, on cornerstones of buildings, a reminder of Rome's lasting presence in our everyday world. Picture a Roman merchant calculating accounts, arranging pebbles on a counting board, translating quantities into those elegant letters carved in stone. Fact 27. Pompeii, a city frozen in time. In 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius, the volcano overlooking the Bay of Naples, erupted catastrophically. The nearby city of Pompeii was buried under volcanic ash and pumice, entombing everything in its path. For nearly 1700 years, Pompeii lay hidden, forgotten. When excavations began in the 18th century, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary: a Roman city perfectly preserved, frozen in a single moment. They found houses with meals still on tables, shops with their goods, walls covered in graffiti, and gardens where roots had left hollow spaces in the hardened ash. Even the forms of people were preserved, their final moments captured in voids that archaeologists filled with plaster. Pompeii gives us an intimate window into Roman life, a gift from tragedy, showing us one ordinary day that never ended. Fact 28. Roman roads built to last. Let's return to those remarkable Roman roads, for they deserve a closer look. When Romans built a road, they built it to last centuries. First, they dug a trench several feet deep. They filled it with layers: large stones at the bottom, then gravel, then sand and smaller stones, and finally flat paving stones fitted so precisely that you couldn't slip a blade between them. The road crowned in the middle for drainage, with ditches on either side to carry away water. Milestones marked every 1,000 paces, a Roman mile. Rest stations appeared at regular intervals. These roads connected the empire, allowing armies to march quickly, merchants to trade, and messengers to carry news. They were more than infrastructure. They were the threads that stitched the empire together. Fact 29. The Praetorian Guard. The emperors of Rome needed protection, and they found it in an elite unit called the Praetorian Guard. These were the best soldiers, handpicked for their loyalty and skill, stationed in Rome itself rather than on distant frontiers. They wore distinctive uniforms and received higher pay than regular legionaries. But the Praetorian Guard became more than bodyguards. They became kingmakers. More than one emperor discovered that the very men sworn to protect him might also decide his fate. Some emperors were murdered by their own guards, others placed on the throne by them. The Praetorians served for over 300 years, a force both essential and dangerous, sleeping in barracks near the heart of power. Fact 30. Roman law. Perhaps Rome's greatest legacy isn't their buildings or roads, but their system of law. Roman law developed over centuries, becoming increasingly sophisticated. They distinguished between different types of law: civil law for disputes between citizens, criminal law for offenses against the state, and so on. They believed in written law, in evidence, in the right to defend oneself. Many principles we take for granted today have Roman roots. The idea that one is innocent until proven guilty, that laws should be published and known, that legal agreements should be honored. When the Emperor Justinian codified Roman law in the 6th century CE, he created a resource that would influence legal systems for the next 1500 years and counting. Fact 31. Roman names for days and months. We live by a calendar deeply Roman in character. Look at the days of the week in Latin-based languages, or the months in English. January honors Janus, god of beginnings and doorways. March honors Mars, god of war, and marks when the campaigning season would traditionally begin. July was named for Julius Caesar, August for Augustus. Saturn gives us Saturday. The moon gives us Monday. The Romans organized time itself, giving names to the days and months that would echo through millennia. Each time we write a date, we're speaking in Roman echoes. Fact 32. Roman gardens. Romans loved their gardens, creating green sanctuaries within their homes and throughout their cities. A wealthy domus would have a peristyle garden at its heart, a colonnaded courtyard planted with flowers, herbs, and small trees. Fountains provided the gentle sound of water. Marble statues stood among the roses. These weren't wild spaces but carefully cultivated ones, nature shaped by human hands into beauty and harmony. Even emperors maintained vast pleasure gardens. The gardens of Sallust, the gardens of Maecenas. These were places to escape the noise of the city, to walk in shade, to think and dream and find peace. Close your eyes and imagine walking through such a garden on a warm afternoon, the scent of jasmine on the air, bees humming among the lavender, the world held at bay by walls covered in climbing vines. And so we rest in that garden a while, in the dappled shade of an ancient afternoon, the distant sounds of the city softened by distance and time, the air sweet with flowers that bloomed 2,000 years ago and bloom still in memory, letting the peace of that place settle over us like evening light. Fact 33. Roman religion. The Romans were a deeply religious people, but their religion was quite different from what many know today. They worshipped many gods, each with their own sphere of influence. Jupiter, king of the gods, ruled the sky and thunder. Juno protected women and marriage. Mars governed war. Venus guided love. But Roman religion wasn't just about great temples and grand ceremonies. It was woven into daily life. Families kept small shrines called Lauraria in their homes, honoring household spirits called Lauras and Penates. Before beginning any important task, a Roman might make an offering, say a prayer, seek a blessing. Religion was about maintaining the Pax Deorum, peace with the gods, through proper ritual and respect. It was a relationship that required constant attention, like tending a flame that must never go out. Fact 34. Roman festivals. The Roman year was punctuated by festivals, days of celebration and ritual that broke the rhythm of ordinary time. There was Saturnalia in December, when social norms inverted, masters might serve their slaves, gifts were exchanged, and the whole city gave itself over to revelry and feasting. Lupercalia in February involved priests running through the streets, striking people with strips of goat hide to promote fertility. The Vestalia in June honored Vesta and her sacred flame. Each festival had its own character, its own traditions. These weren't just holidays. They were the threads that connected Romans to their gods, their history, their community. Imagine the streets filled with processions, the smoke of sacrifices rising toward the sky, the whole city participating in rituals that had been performed for centuries. Fact 35. Roman marriage. Marriage in Rome was both a personal bond and a social contract, uniting families as much as individuals. A wedding would begin with the bride, dressed in white with a flame-colored veil, leaving her father's house. There would be a sacrifice, prayers, the joining of hands. The couple would sign a contract, witnessed by family and friends. Then came the procession to the groom's house, with guests singing and carrying torches. At the threshold, the groom would lift his bride and carry her across, careful that she didn't stumble. A stumble would be an ill omen. Inside, she would touch fire and water, symbolic elements of her new household. It was a ceremony rich with meaning, each gesture carrying the weight of tradition, each moment marking the passage from one life to another. Fact 36. Slavery in Rome. We cannot tell Rome's story without acknowledging a darker truth. Roman society was built significantly on slave labor. Slaves in Rome came from many sources. Prisoners of war, people born into slavery, those sold to pay debts. Their lives varied greatly. Some worked in terrible conditions in mines or on large agricultural estates. Others were household servants, teachers, doctors, or craftspeople. Some slaves were treated relatively well by their owners, others suffered greatly. Manumission, being granted freedom, was possible, and freedmen could become citizens though they never fully escaped their past. Slavery was so woven into Roman life that they could barely imagine society without it. It's a reminder that even great civilizations can be built on foundations of injustice, and that we must see history whole, acknowledging both achievement and harm. Fact 37. Roman mosaics. Walk into a wealthy Roman home and look down. Beneath your feet might be a masterpiece, a mosaic made from thousands of tiny colored tiles called tesserae. Romans created these intricate images from small pieces of stone, glass, or ceramic, arranged so precisely that from a distance they looked like paintings. Geometric patterns bordered scenes of mythology, daily life, or nature. Fish seemed to swim across bathroom floors. Gods and heroes gazed up from dining room mosaics. Creating a mosaic required patience, skill, and vision. Each tiny piece placed deliberately, building slowly toward the complete image. Many of these mosaics survive today, their colors still bright, their images still clear, small tiles that have outlasted empires. Fact 38. Roman literature. Rome produced writers whose words still speak to us across the centuries. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, an epic poem telling how the Trojan hero Aeneas journeyed to Italy and became the ancestor of Rome's founders, a story that gave Romans a mythic past connecting them to the heroes of Troy. Ovid wrote the Metamorphoses, a collection of myths about transformation, filled with gods and mortals changing shape, becoming stars, trees, rivers, echoes. Cicero wrote speeches and letters that showcased the power of Latin rhetoric. The historian Tacitus chronicled the emperors with a critical eye. These weren't just entertaining stories or dry records. They were Romans thinking about virtue, duty, love, power, fate. They were asking the same questions humans have always asked. What makes a good life? What do we owe each other? How should we face mortality? And in beautiful Latin that still echoes today, they offered their answers. Fact 39. The Latin language. Latin, the language of Rome, became the language of an empire. As Roman legions marched and Roman administrators governed, Latin spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. It evolved differently in different places, eventually becoming the Romance languages we know today: Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Romanian. But Latin didn't just give us these languages. It gave us a vast vocabulary. More than half of English words have Latin roots. When we say empire, republic, constitution, justice, or citizen, we're speaking Latin. Medical and legal terminology remains largely Latin. Scientific names for plants and animals use Latin. The language of Rome, like their roads and laws, proved built to last, carrying Roman thought and Roman ways of organizing the world into the present day. Fact 40. Roman engineering. The Romans were master engineers who understood materials and forces with remarkable sophistication. They perfected the arch, which allowed them to span great distances and support enormous weight. They developed concrete, mixing volcanic ash with lime and water to create a material that could set underwater and grow stronger with time. Some Roman concrete structures have lasted 2,000 years. They built massive domes like the Pantheons that still inspire awe. They engineered bridges that carried roads across rivers, amphitheaters that held 50,000 people safely, harbors that welcomed ships from across the known world. Roman engineers didn't just build. They built on a scale and with a durability that proclaimed, in stone and concrete, an engineering genius. And so we trace our fingers across Latin inscriptions worn smooth by time. Rome speaks to us still in the languages we speak, the buildings we admire, the very structure of our thoughts. And in this speaking, this ancient voice, we find a strange comfort. That civilizations rise and fall, yes, but something of them endures, whispers on, lives in those who remember. Let us journey now to the edges of the empire, where Roman influence met the wider world, where different cultures touched and transformed one another. Fact 41. The extent of the empire. At its height, under Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century CE, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain in the northwest to Egypt in the southeast, from Spain in the west to Mesopotamia in the east. It encompassed the entire Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, RC, the Romans called it. The empire covered roughly 2 million square miles and governed perhaps 60 million people, speaking dozens of languages, following countless local customs. Yet all were connected by Roman roads, Roman law, Roman peace. A merchant in Alexandria could trade with one in Londinium. A soldier from Syria might garrison the border in Germania. The empire was vast, diverse, yet unified by the idea of Rome, by citizenship, by the structures that held it all together like mortar between stones. Fact 42. Hadrian's Wall. In the north of Britain, where the empire reached its limit, Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a wall. Built between 122 and 128 CE, it stretched 73 miles from coast to coast, marking the boundary between Roman Britain and the lands beyond. The wall was a remarkable feat. Stone fortification up to 15 feet high in places, with a ditch in front and another behind, punctuated by small forts called mile castles every Roman mile, with turrets between them for observation. Soldiers from across the empire garrisoned this distant frontier, standing watch in the rain and wind, maintaining the edge of civilization as they understood it. The wall still stands in places today, a line drawn across the landscape, a reminder that even Rome had limits, edges beyond which they chose not to go. Fact 43. Roman Britain. For nearly 4 centuries Britain was Roman. They called it Britannia and they transformed it. They built towns where there had been none. Londinium, which became London. Eboracum, which became York. Aquisulis, where Bath now stands. They built roads connecting these towns, villas in the countryside, bath houses where people could relax in the Roman manner. Latin was spoken in the towns, though Celtic languages persisted in the countryside. Roman and Britain intermarried, traded, lived side by side. Britain became part of the Roman world, sending resources to the empire, receiving goods and ideas in return. When the legions finally withdrew in the early 5th century, they left behind roads, ruins, and memories that would shape Britain for centuries to come. Fact 44. Roman Egypt. Egypt, that ancient land of pharaohs and pyramids, became a Roman province after the death of Cleopatra in 30 BCE. But Egypt was special, critically important to Rome. It was the breadbasket of the empire. Egyptian grain fed the city of Rome itself, arriving in great ships that sailed from Alexandria. The emperors governed Egypt directly, jealously, not trusting it to a senator who might use its wealth to threaten their power. Roman and Egyptian culture blended in fascinating ways. Romans marveled at Egypt's ancient monuments. Egyptian gods, like Isis, found worshippers throughout the empire. In the desert sands near Alexandria, Romans and Egyptians lived side by side, ancient meeting classical, the Nile flowing through it all as it had for millennia, carrying both water and history. Fact 45. Roman trade. Rome's tentacles of trade reached far beyond their political borders. Silk arrived from distant China, traveling the long Silk Road through Central Asia. Spices came from India. Pepper was so valuable it was sometimes used as currency. Amber came from the Baltic, incense from Arabia, exotic animals from Africa for the arenas. In return, Roman goods, glassware, wine, metalwork, and coins, spread across the known world. Roman coins have been found in India, Vietnam, even China. Trade ships braved storms and pirates to carry goods across the Mediterranean and beyond. Markets in Rome offered products from 3 continents. The empire wasn't just connected by roads and legions, it was connected by merchants, by the constant flow of goods and ideas, by the web of commerce that made distant places tangible and real. Fact 46. Roman medicine. Roman doctors, many of them Greek, practiced medicine with a blend of knowledge and superstition that seems both familiar and foreign to us now. They understood anatomy better than we might think. Dissection taught them about organs and bones. They performed surgeries, set broken bones, and treated wounds. They had surgical tools remarkably similar to modern ones: scalpels, forceps, catheters. The physician Galen, who lived in the 2nd century CE, wrote extensively about medicine, and his works would influence medical practice for over 1,000 years. Romans knew the importance of hygiene. Their baths and aqueducts helped keep disease at bay. They understood that swamps bred illness, though they didn't know about mosquitoes and malaria. They mixed herbs into remedies, some effective, some less so. A Roman hospital, called a valetudinarium, served soldiers on the frontiers, a quiet place where the wounded might heal, tended by those who practiced the healing arts as best they understood them. Fact 47. Roman music. Music filled Roman life, though sadly we can never hear it as they did. No Roman melodies survive. We know they had instruments: the lyre with strings plucked or strummed, the flute made of wood or bone, trumpets of bronze that announced ceremonies, the water organ, a complex instrument powered by water pressure. Music accompanied religious ceremonies, theatrical performances, military marches, and private entertainment. Musicians performed at banquets while guests reclined and dined. Street performers played for coins in busy forums. Soldiers marched to the sound of horns and drums. The Romans appreciated music from across their empire. Greek modes and melodies, Egyptian rhythms, Celtic songs. Though the actual sounds are lost to time, we can imagine the air filled with them. Flutes echoing in a temple, a lyre playing softly in an atrium at dusk, the triumphant blare of horns as a victorious legion entered the city. Fact 48. The Roman concept of pietas. To understand Rome, we must understand pietas, a word that doesn't translate neatly into English. It meant duty, devotion, loyalty. But more than that, it meant fulfilling your obligations to the gods, to your family, to your ancestors, and to Rome itself. Aeneas, the hero of Virgil's Aeneid, was called pious Aeneas, dutiful Aeneas, because he carried his father from burning Troy, because he honored the gods, because he put duty before personal desire. Pietas was what held society together, what made a good Roman. It was the parent caring for children, the child honoring parents, the citizen serving the state, the soldier defending the empire. It was a web of mutual obligations, each person understanding their place and responsibilities. In a world that could be harsh and unpredictable, pietas provided structure, meaning, a sense that your life was part of something larger and more enduring than yourself. And so we see Rome whole now, not just a city but a world, stretching from misty Britain to sun-soaked Egypt, from Spanish silver mines to Syrian trade routes, connected by duty and roads and the shared idea of what it meant to be Roman, an idea strong enough to unite millions, diverse enough to embrace them all, and we rest in that immensity, that grand human project of connection and order, letting its scale humble us into peaceful smallness. As we move through time, we come now to the meeting of Rome and a new faith, a transformation that would echo through the ages. Fact 49. The rise of Christianity. In the eastern provinces of the empire, in a small corner called Judea, a new religion began. Christianity started with the followers of Jesus of Nazareth, and after his death, it spread slowly at first. Small communities gathering in homes, sharing meals, caring for the poor, believing in resurrection and eternal life. To the Roman authorities, Christians seemed strange, even suspicious. They refused to honor the Roman gods or make sacrifices to the emperor's genius, actions that any loyal subject performed. They spoke of a kingdom not of this world. They met in secret. Periodically, emperors persecuted them, sometimes savagely. Yet Christianity continued to grow, offering something the traditional Roman religion didn't: personal salvation, forgiveness, the promise that the poor and suffering had special dignity in God's eyes. In the catacombs beneath Rome, Christians buried their dead and painted symbols on the walls: fish, anchors, the Good Shepherd, signs of hope in the darkness. Fact 50. Constantine the Great. Everything changed with Constantine. In 312 CE, before a crucial battle at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine reportedly saw a vision: a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields, won the battle, and became sole emperor of the West. The next year, the Edict of Milan granted religious tolerance throughout the empire, ending persecution of Christians. Constantine himself converted, though he wasn't baptized until his deathbed. He built magnificent churches, including the first St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. He convened councils to settle theological disputes. Christianity went from a persecuted sect to the favored religion of the most powerful man in the world. The empire that had once fed Christians to lions now built them cathedrals. Fact 51. Constantinople, the new Rome. Constantine made another momentous decision. He founded a new capital in the east, on the site of the ancient city of Byzantium. He called it Constantinople, Constantine's city, though it would later be known as Istanbul. The city straddled Europe and Asia, commanding the straits between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Constantine built it to rival Rome, a Christian capital for what he hoped would be a Christian empire. There were churches instead of pagan temples, forums and baths and palaces, mighty walls to protect it. Constantinople would outlast Rome itself, enduring as the capital of the Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years after the Western Empire fell. It became one of the greatest cities of the medieval world, a bridge between ancient and modern, between East and West, preserving Roman law and Greek learning through centuries of change. Fact 52. Roman philosophy. Romans absorbed Greek philosophy and made it their own, particularly the school called Stoicism. The Stoics taught that virtue was the highest good, that we should focus on what we can control and accept calmly what we cannot. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, wrote his Meditations while on military campaign, private reflections on how to live well, how to face hardship with equanimity, how to do one's duty without complaint. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he wrote. Realize this and you will find strength. Seneca, another Stoic, wrote essays and letters about anger, grief, and the shortness of life. These weren't abstract academic exercises. They were practical guides for living, wisdom meant to be applied. Roman philosophy asked, how should we live? How should we face mortality? What do we owe each other? The answers they offered still resonate, still provide comfort and guidance across the span of centuries. Fact 53. Roman architecture. Roman buildings were designed to impress, to showcase power and permanence. They favored massive structures. The Basilica of Maxentius with its soaring vaulted ceilings, the baths of Caracalla that could accommodate thousands, triumphal arches celebrating military victories. They used concrete creatively, building domes and vaults that pushed the limits of what was possible. Columns borrowed from Greek styles. Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, but made grander, more elaborate. Buildings were faced with marble, decorated with sculptures, designed to make you feel small in their presence. But Roman architecture wasn't just about grandeur. It was also practical. Apartment buildings for the masses, warehouses for goods, markets with covered colonnades. Every building served a purpose, whether that purpose was glory, utility, or both. Walk through the ruins today and you can still feel what they were reaching for. Beauty, yes, but also permanence, the desire to build something that would outlast flesh and memory. Fact 54. The Circus Maximus. Before the Colosseum, before the elaborate amphitheaters, there was the Circus Maximus, Rome's great chariot racing stadium. It stretched nearly 2,000 feet long, nestled in the valley between the Aventine and Palatine hills. At its peak, it could hold perhaps 250,000 spectators, a quarter of Rome's population. The races were thrilling, dangerous spectacles. 4 teams competed, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, and Romans supported their teams with passionate loyalty, sometimes erupting into riots. Charioteers were often slaves, but successful ones could win freedom and fortune. They raced 7 laps around the central barrier, called the Spina, adorned with obelisks and statues. The thunder of hooves, the roar of the crowd, the danger of collisions at the tight turns. The circus offered excitement on a massive scale and Rome loved it. Fact 55. Roman wine. Wine was the drink of Rome, consumed daily by rich and poor alike, though usually mixed with water. Drinking it undiluted was considered barbaric. Wine came from vineyards across the empire, Gaul, Spain, Italy itself. It was stored in large clay vessels called amphorae, marked with the region and vintage. The Romans understood that some wines improved with age, that terroir mattered, that different grapes produced different flavors. At a dinner party, the host might serve multiple wines, each paired with different courses. Wine was also offered to the gods. Libations poured out during religious ceremonies. In Pompeii, archaeologists found wine shops with amphoras still standing in their racks, wine bars with serving counters, even ancient graffiti advertising prices. Wine flowed through Roman life like a golden thread, bringing pleasure, celebration, and a taste of the empire's abundance. Fact 56. The Roman Senate. The Senate was the heart of Roman government, particularly during the Republic. 600 senators, all from wealthy families, met in the Senate House to debate laws, advise magistrates, and guide policy. To be a senator was to reach the pinnacle of Roman society. Senators wore togas with a distinctive broad purple stripe. They sat on curved benches, arranged by seniority, speaking in turn according to complex rules of precedence. Under the Republic, the Senate held real power, though it could not pass laws directly. It advised, but its advice carried enormous weight. Under the Empire, the Senate's power gradually eroded as emperors accumulated authority. Yet it persisted, maintaining the forms and dignity of republican government even when the substance had shifted. The Senate represented continuity, tradition, the aristocratic foundation of Roman governance, a body that endured in some form for over 1,000 years. And so we sit in that Senate chamber, empty now, silent, sunlight falling through broken roof beams onto stone benches where senators once debated the fate of nations. The voices gone, the debates settled long ago, but the chamber itself remains, a shell holding the echo of vanished authority, and in that echo, in that emptiness, we find a strange peace, the peace of things completed, of stories told, of time that has moved on, leaving only stone and memory. We approach now the twilight of the Western Empire, when the structures that had endured for centuries began to shift and transform, when the world Rome had built started to give way to something new. Fact 57. The division of the empire. The Roman Empire had grown too large for one person to govern effectively. In 285 CE, Emperor Diocletian formalized what had been growing apparent. He divided the empire into eastern and western halves, each with its own emperor. He established the Tetrarchy, rule by 4, with 2 senior emperors called Augusti and 2 junior ones called Caesars. The system didn't last in its original form, but the division between East and West persisted. The Western Empire would be governed from Rome, later from Ravenna. The Eastern Empire, wealthier and more stable, would be ruled from Constantinople. They were still one empire in theory, but in practice they began to drift apart, developing different priorities, different challenges, different destinies. The East would flourish for another 1,000 years. The West had less than 2 centuries remaining. Fact 58. Barbarian invasions. The borders that had been secure for centuries began to crack. Germanic tribes pressed against the northern frontiers. Goths, Vandals, Franks, Burgundians, and others. They weren't mindless hordes. Many had traded with Rome for generations, served in Roman armies, adopted Roman ways. But population pressures, conflicts with other tribes, and the weakness of Roman defenses pushed them across the borders. Some came as invaders, others as refugees seeking safety. Rome could no longer hold them back. In 410 CE, Visigoths under Alaric sacked Rome itself, the first time the city had fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. The shock reverberated throughout the empire. Rome, eternal Rome, had been violated. Though the city recovered and life continued, something intangible had broken. The spell of invincibility that had protected Rome for so long. Fact 59. The fall of the Western Empire. The Western Empire declined gradually, then suddenly. Emperors came and went with dizzying speed, often controlled by their Germanic generals. Provinces were lost. Britain, Spain, North Africa, Gaul. The economy weakened. The legions that had guarded the frontiers melted away. In 476 CE, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. A name that echoed both Rome's founder and its first emperor, a poetic ending for the empire. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, declaring he would rule Italy as the Eastern Emperor's deputy. But in reality the Western Roman Empire had ended. Not with a great battle or cataclysm, but with a quiet abdication, a boy emperor pensioned off to a villa, and the slow realization that Rome would not rise again. Fact 60. The legacy of Rome. Yet Rome did not truly fall. It transformed. The Eastern Empire, which we call Byzantium, endured until 1453, preserving Roman law and administration. The Catholic Church, structured like the Roman state, became the inheritor of Roman authority in the West. Latin remained the language of learning and law for over 1,000 years. Roman law influenced legal systems throughout Europe and beyond. Roman architecture inspired builders for centuries. The Renaissance looked back to Rome, as did neoclassical movements afterward. Democratic institutions borrowed from Republican Rome. The concept of citizenship, of written law, of organized government. These are Roman gifts. Walk through any Western city and you walk through Rome's shadow. In the buildings, the laws, the language, the very structure of thought and governance. Rome fell, yes. But it also endured, woven so deeply into what came after that we still live in its world. Fact 61. Roman women. Women in Rome occupied a complex position. They couldn't vote or hold office, yet they had more freedom than women in many ancient societies. Roman women could own property, inherit wealth, and conduct business. They weren't sequestered at home as Greek women often were. Wealthy women attended public events, managed households, and influenced politics through their husbands and sons. Some women became powerful. Livia, wife of Augustus, advised her husband and son. Agrippina the younger manipulated her way to power through marriage and murder. Yet most Roman women lived quieter lives, running households, raising children, managing family affairs. Upper-class girls received education. Tombstones commemorate wives as faithful, mothers as devoted. Women worked as shopkeepers, midwives, entertainers. They were part of Roman life, contributing to it in ways both visible and invisible, even if formal power remained in male hands. Fact 62. Roman children. Roman children began life with uncertainty. Infant mortality was high, and not all babies born survived their first weeks. Families would formally accept a newborn in a ceremony, lifting the child from the ground where it had been placed. The child would then receive a name and become part of the family. Childhood itself was shorter than in modern times. Children wore a special amulet called a bulla for protection. Boys would come of age around 14, setting aside childish things and assuming the toga of manhood. Girls married younger, sometimes in their early teens. Yet children were children. Archaeologists have found toys in Pompeii, dolls, balls, miniature dishes. Children played games in the streets, got into mischief, learned from their parents. They were treasured, mourned when lost. On tombstones, parents expressed grief for children taken too soon, words of love carved in stone that still touch us 2,000 years later. Fact 63. Roman names for body parts. Latin gave us many anatomical terms we still use. The Romans called muscles musculi, little mice, because they seemed to scurry under the skin. The spine was the columna vertebralis, the vertebral column. The collarbone was the clavicula, little key, for its shape. These weren't just words but observations, attempts to describe the human body with precision. Roman physicians studied anatomy, wrote about it, built a vocabulary that would persist through medieval times and into the modern medical lexicon. When a doctor today speaks of your cranium, sternum, femur, or radius, they're speaking Latin using words Romans used, maintaining a linguistic connection across 2 millennia of medical practice. Fact 64. The Roman triumph. When a general won a great victory, he might be granted the highest honor Rome could offer, a triumph. This was a spectacular parade through Rome's streets. The general rode in a chariot, wearing a purple toga and a laurel crown, his face painted red like the statue of Jupiter. Before him marched the spoils of war, treasure, weapons, exotic animals, captives and chains. His soldiers followed, singing songs that mocked him even as they celebrated, a reminder that glory was temporary. The procession wound through the city to the temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, where the general would make sacrifice and offer thanks. It was a day of glory, yes, but also a reminder of duty fulfilled, of victory earned through blood and courage, of a general's obligation to Rome and to the gods. The triumph was Rome at its most theatrical, its most proud, celebrating conquest while remembering the divine powers that made it possible. And so we walk behind that ancient triumph, spectators in the crowd, watching the procession pass in all its glory, the general knowing that this moment, like all moments, will fade, the captives knowing their world has ended, the soldiers knowing they survived, and we looking back across time knowing how all their stories end, knowing Rome itself will fall and rise and fall again in memory, and in this knowing, this long perspective, we find ourselves growing peaceful, growing calm, settling like dust after the parade has passed, like silence after the songs have ended. As we near the end of our journey through Rome, let us gather the remaining threads of this vast tapestry, small details and grand truths that complete the picture. Fact 65. Roman ships. Rome may have been built on 7 hills, but it became a maritime power. Roman ships sailed the Mediterranean and beyond, connecting the empire by sea as roads connected it by land. Merchant vessels called corbita carried grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain. They were round-hulled, sturdy, designed to carry cargo safely. Warships were different, sleek galleys powered by rows of oarsmen, with bronze rams at the prow for naval combat. The largest had 3 banks of oars, triremes, requiring precise coordination to row effectively. Roman naval victories secured control of the Mediterranean. Merchant captains learned to read the stars, the winds, the seasons. Winter brought dangerous storms, so most ships stayed in port. But in the sailing season, the sea was alive with vessels, sails catching the wind, carrying the goods and people that kept the empire connected across blue waters. Fact 66. The Catacombs. Beneath Rome's streets lay another city. The catacombs, underground burial chambers carved into the soft tufa stone. Early Christians used these tunnels to bury their dead, as Roman law prohibited burial within the city walls. Miles of narrow passages, chambers carved with niches for bodies, walls painted with early Christian symbols and scenes. The catacombs were quiet, cool, dark, a city of the dead where the living came to remember, to pray, to feel close to those who had passed. They held martyrs and ordinary faithful alike, each burial place marked with names, sometimes with touching inscriptions. Later centuries would romanticize the catacombs as hiding places for persecuted Christians, but truly they were cemeteries, peaceful underground galleries where death was faced with hope of resurrection, where darkness was lit by faith, where the dead waited in stone embrace for the promised awakening. Fact 67. Roman coins. Roman coins were more than money. They were propaganda, miniature works of art, historical records. Each coin bore the emperor's image on one side, establishing his authority throughout the empire. A soldier in Britain or Syria would see the emperor's face on his pay, a reminder of who ruled. The reverse side might show military victories, architectural achievements, or symbolic images, goddesses of peace or victory, personifications of Rome or provinces. Coins circulated everywhere, carrying messages and imagery far beyond where official announcements could reach. Archaeologists study Roman coins to understand trade routes, economic conditions, political messages. A hoard of coins buried and never recovered tells a story, perhaps someone fleeing invasion, hiding their wealth, never able to return. Each coin is a small metal witness to commerce, power, and the daily transactions that sustained empire. Fact 68. Roman slavery, daily life. Beyond the moral questions, slavery shaped daily Roman life in practical ways. Wealthy households might have dozens of slaves, each with specific duties. There was the nomenclator who remembered guests' names, the ostiarius who kept the door, cooks and cleaners and secretaries. Educated slaves served as teachers, doctors, or accountants. Farm slaves worked in agriculture, often in harsh conditions. Some slaves saved their peculium, a small amount of money they could keep, hoping eventually to buy their freedom. Masters varied from cruel to kind, but always the fundamental inequality remained. A slave might be trusted, even cherished, yet still property. Freedmen kept relationships with their former masters, now as clients and patrons. Slavery was woven so thoroughly into Roman society that they struggled to imagine alternatives. It supported their economy, enabled their leisure, and compromised their ideals, a shadow running through Roman achievement. Fact 69. Roman time. Romans measured time differently than we do. They divided daylight into 12 hours regardless of season, so a summer hour was longer than a winter one. Night was divided into 4 watches. They told time by sundials during the day, though these were only useful when the sun shone. Water clocks, called clepsydry, measured time by steady dripping, useful day or night. But precise timekeeping wasn't as important in Roman life. Events happened at relative times. The third hour, midday, evening. Life moved by the sun's rhythm, by seasons, by agricultural cycles. There was time for work and time for rest, time for duty and time for the baths. In a world without artificial light, sunset meant the day ended. In a world without schedules demanding minute-by-minute accounting, Time flowed more like a river than a series of appointments, constant but flexible, marking life's rhythms without dominating them. Fact 70. Pompeii's graffiti. When archaeologists uncovered Pompeii, they found something unexpected on the walls: graffiti everywhere. Romans wrote on walls the way we write on social media. Declarations of love, insults, advertisements, political slogans, crude jokes, poetry, simple statements like, "I was here." Someone wrote, "Successus was here." Others complained about innkeepers, still others praised gladiators. One person wrote philosophical musings, another drew anatomical sketches. These weren't formal inscriptions but spontaneous expressions, the voices of ordinary Romans speaking directly to us. They're funny, touching, crude, human. They remind us that Romans weren't distant historical figures but people with the same impulses, frustrations, affections, and humor we have. They felt compelled to leave their mark, to say, "I existed, I thought this, I felt that." And 2,000 years later, we read their words and smile, connected across time by our shared humanity. Fact 71. The Roman military camp. Wherever Roman legions marched, at day's end they built a camp, castra. This wasn't a casual arrangement of tents. It was a systematic fortified encampment, the same layout used every time. Soldiers dug a defensive ditch, piled the earth into a rampart, topped it with stakes they carried. Inside, tents were arranged in precise grids. The commander's tent stood at the center. Streets ran in straight lines. Gates faced the cardinal directions. In a few hours, an entire fortified town appeared where there had been empty ground. This provided security, yes, but also something else: familiarity. No matter where in the empire a soldier found himself, his camp was always the same. It was mobile Rome, order imposed on chaos, home recreated each night wherever the legion stopped. Many Roman towns began as these temporary camps, soldiers settling where they'd once marched, the grid of the camp becoming the grid of streets, military order transforming into civilian life. Fact 72. Roman concrete. Roman concrete was a marvel that still puzzles engineers today. They mixed lime with volcanic ash called pozzolana, adding water and aggregate, stones or broken pottery. The volcanic ash gave the concrete remarkable properties. It could set underwater, allowing Romans to build harbors and bridges. More remarkably, it grew stronger over time, especially when exposed to seawater. Modern concrete crumbles after decades, but Roman concrete has lasted 2,000 years. The Pantheon's dome, the harbor works at Caesarea, ancient bridges still bearing weight, all testify to their formula. For centuries after Rome fell, the secret of Roman concrete was lost. Only recently have scientists begun to understand its chemistry. The Romans built for eternity, and their concrete at least achieved it, still standing, still strong, still serving as foundation for the cities built atop the ruins. And so we come to rest among the ruins, among the walls where ancient people wrote their names, among concrete that outlasted empire, surrounded by the fragments of lives lived long ago but somehow still present. And we find in these fragments not sadness but a strange comfort, that something endures, that human effort and human voice can echo across such distances. And in that echo we hear not just Rome but ourselves, not just history but humanity, and we rest now, peacefully held by these ancient stories, cradled by time's long memory. Let us wander now through the final chambers of our Roman story, gathering the last threads of this ancient world, savoring the details that make history feel alive and close. Fact 73. Roman jewelry. Romans adorned themselves with jewelry that ranged from simple to spectacular. Gold rings marked social status. Senators wore gold rings as a sign of their rank. Women wore necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and fibulae, ornate brooches that fastened their clothing. Skilled craftsmen worked gold into intricate patterns, set gemstones in elaborate settings, created cameos with layers of colored stone carved to show different images. Amber from the Baltic was prized, pearls from the Red Sea treasured. A wealthy woman might wear rings on every finger, gold chains around her neck, emeralds dangling from her ears. But jewelry wasn't just ornament. It was portable wealth, investment, inheritance passed from mother to daughter. In a world without banks as we know them, A collection of jewelry represented security, beauty, and legacy intertwined in gold and stone. Fact 74. The Roman toga. We've mentioned the toga before, but let's linger with it a moment longer. This semicircular woolen garment, when properly draped, required skill and patience. It wrapped around the body in precise folds, leaving one arm free, creating dignified lines that proclaimed citizenship. Different togas marked different roles. The toga praetexta, edged with purple, worn by magistrates and freeborn boys. The pure white toga virilis of adult male citizens. The dark toga pulla worn for mourning. Putting on a toga required help. No one managed it alone. It was hot, heavy, impractical. Men complained about it even in ancient times. Yet wearing the toga meant something. You were a citizen, you belonged to Rome, you participated in its public life. For formal occasions, Romans endured the discomfort, accepting the toga's constraint as the price of dignity, the fabric weight of citizenship itself. Fact 75. Roman dining. A formal Roman dinner, a cena, was an elaborate affair. Guests reclined on couches arranged around a central table, propping themselves on their left elbow and eating with their right hand. The meal proceeded in courses. Appetizers called gastatio, main courses, then dessert. Wealthy hosts served elaborate dishes, dormice and honey, flamingo tongues, exotic delicacies meant to impress. But most Romans ate simpler fare: bread, olive oil, vegetables, fish, cheese. Dinner wasn't just about food, it was about conversation, entertainment. Musicians might play, poets recite, philosophers debate. Slaves circulated with pitchers of wine and water. The meal could last hours, a social event where deals were made, friendships cemented, culture displayed. To dine together was to share life, and Romans understood that breaking bread together, or in their case reclining together, created bonds that sustained their social world. Fact 76. Roman sewers. Less glamorous but equally important to Roman life was their sewage system. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems, drained the marshy land between Rome's hills and carried waste to the Tiber. Originally an open canal, it was gradually covered over, becoming an underground system. Other sewers branched from it, draining water from streets, baths, and public latrines. Romans understood that clean water in and wastewater out were essential for health, even if they didn't understand germ theory. The sewers weren't perfect. Many homes, particularly apartments, lacked connections to the system. But for a city of Rome's size, the sewers were a remarkable achievement, a testament to Roman engineering's unglamorous but essential side. While tourists admire the Colosseum, it's the sewers beneath that made a city of 1 million people possible. Fact 77. Hadrian, the traveling emperor. Emperor Hadrian, who ruled from 117 to 138 CE, was unusual among emperors. Rather than staying in Rome, he spent much of his reign traveling throughout the empire, visiting provinces from Britain to Egypt. He inspected troops, founded cities, built monuments, and absorbed the cultures he encountered. He loved Greek culture and wore a beard in Greek fashion, unusual for Romans of his time. In Egypt, he mourned the death of his beloved companion Antinous so deeply that he founded a city in his honor and declared him a god. Hadrian was a builder. Besides his famous wall in Britain, he rebuilt the Pantheon, constructed his massive villa at Tivoli, and initiated countless other projects. He represents Rome at a moment of security and prosperity, an emperor who had time to appreciate beauty, to travel, to build for posterity rather than just defend borders or fight civil wars. Fact 78. Roman bridges. Roman bridges spanned rivers throughout the empire, many still standing today. They were built with the same principles as aqueducts: stone arches distributing weight efficiently, foundations sunk deep into riverbeds. The Pons Fabricius in Rome, built in 62 BCE, still carries traffic across the Tiber after more than 2,000 years. Roman engineers understood forces, materials, the importance of solid foundations. They built bridges wide enough for 2 wagons to pass, strong enough to carry marching legions, durable enough to outlast the empire itself. Some bridges served double purposes. The Pont du Gard in France carried an aqueduct across a river valley, a bridge above a bridge. Each Roman bridge was a promise. that you could cross, that commerce and communication would continue, that distance was not isolation. These bridges connected not just riverbanks but peoples, economies, cultures, stone arches holding empire together. Fact 79. The Stoic Emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 161 to 180 CE, stands as perhaps the philosopher king that Plato imagined. He spent much of his reign fighting wars on the northern frontiers, defending the empire against Germanic tribes. Yet in his tent at night, he wrote his meditations, not for publication but as private exercises, reminding himself how to live virtuously amid chaos. He wrote about duty, about accepting fate, about treating others with kindness, about not wasting the short time we're given. Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live, he wrote. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. His was a philosophy of gentle strength, of acceptance without passivity, of doing what's right without expectation of reward. He was one of Rome's better emperors, and his words, never meant for us, have comforted countless people across centuries. Fact 80. Roman libraries. Romans valued knowledge and built libraries to house it. The Great Library of Alexandria in Egypt, though originally Greek, flourished under Roman rule. In Rome itself, public libraries held scrolls in Latin and Greek, available to scholars. The library in Trajan's Forum held rooms for Latin and Greek texts separately. Private libraries were marks of culture and wealth. Cicero, Seneca, and other intellectuals maintained extensive collections. Scrolls were stored in cylindrical containers, organized by subject, catalogued carefully. Imagine quiet rooms where scholars sat reading, the rustle of papyrus, the concentration of people pursuing knowledge. These libraries preserved works that would otherwise have been lost, copied texts that survived to reach us. Much was still lost. Most ancient writing disappeared when libraries burned or scrolls decayed, but what survived often because some Roman library carefully preserved it, some Roman reader valued it enough to have it copied, passing the spark of knowledge forward through time. And so we find ourselves in that quiet library, scrolls arranged on shelves, dust motes floating in afternoon light streaming through high windows, the accumulated knowledge of centuries held in this peaceful room, and we understand that Rome was not just empire and conquest, not just bread and circuses, but also the careful preservation of wisdom, the belief that knowing matters, that words written long ago deserve protection and passing on, and in this understanding, surrounded by the patient silence of collected knowledge, we settle deeper into rest, our minds quieting like that ancient library in the late afternoon, peaceful, complete, content to simply be. As we approach the end of our journey, let us gather these final stories, these last glimpses into the Roman world, savoring each one like the last sips of wine at evening's end. Fact 81. Roman funerals. Death in Rome was met with ritual and ceremony. When someone died, the family would wash and anoint the body, dress it in fine clothes, and lay it out at home for viewing. For prominent citizens, there would be a procession through the streets to the Forum, where a eulogy would be delivered. Hired mourners might wail and tear their clothes, musicians would play dirges. The deceased's ancestors were honored too. Actors wore masks representing dead family members, creating a procession that connected past and present. Cremation was common, the ashes placed in urns and stored in tombs or columbaria, structures with niches like a dovecot. Families would visit these tombs on the anniversary of the death, sharing meals with the departed in spirit. Death wasn't an end to relationship but a transformation, and Roman funerals acknowledged both the grief of loss and the continuity of family across the boundary between living and dead. Fact 82. The Roman Post. Rome created one of the ancient world's most sophisticated postal systems, the cursus publicus. Established by Augustus, it was primarily for government correspondence, military dispatches, and imperial communications. Relay stations were positioned along major roads, about 25 miles apart. Mounted couriers could change horses at these stations, allowing messages to travel quickly across vast distances. An urgent message might travel 50 miles in a day, sometimes more. The system required immense infrastructure: horses, way stations, personnel. It was expensive, restricted to official use, but it meant the emperor in Rome could communicate with governors in distant provinces relatively quickly. Information flowed along Rome's roads as surely as goods and armies, connecting the empire not just physically but administratively, ensuring that Rome's will could be known and implemented from Britain to Syria. Fact 83. Roman tattoos. Tattooing existed in the Roman world, though it was viewed quite differently than body modification today. Romans didn't generally tattoo themselves for decoration. Instead, tattoos were marks of status, usually negative. Criminals might be tattooed on the face or hands as punishment and identification. Slaves were sometimes tattooed with their owner's name. Soldiers occasionally marked themselves, though this was unofficial. There was stigma attached to permanent marks on the body, which Romans associated with barbarians and social outcasts. The body was meant to be clean, unmarked, civilized. Yet the practice existed at the margins, and through Rome's contact with cultures that did practice decorative tattooing, they were familiar with the concept. It's a reminder that even in small details, Roman values differed from ours, that they drew lines of acceptability in different places, that their world, for all its similarities, was also foreign. Fact 84. Roman theater. Theater thrived in Rome, though it developed differently than in Greece. Roman theaters were architectural marvels, built of stone with elaborate stage buildings, tiered seating that could hold thousands. Unlike Greek theaters built into hillsides, Roman theaters were freestanding structures. Romans enjoyed comedies by playwrights like Plautus and Terence, filled with stock characters. The clever slave, the foolish old man, the young lovers. They loved spectacle. Tragedies staged with elaborate effects. Pantomimes where a single masked dancer portrayed multiple characters through gesture and movement. Actors were generally of low social status, but popular ones achieved fame and wealth. The theater was another place where Romans gathered, where they saw themselves reflected, mocked, elevated. The masks actors wore, comedy's smiling face, tragedy's frown, became symbols that we still use today, connecting us to those ancient audiences who sat in stone seats watching human nature displayed on stage. Fact 85. Roman mirrors. Romans looked at themselves in polished metal mirrors, bronze, silver, or speculum metal, an alloy that took a particularly fine polish. These mirrors were smaller than modern ones, held in the hand, backed with decorative designs. The reflection they provided was dimmer, less perfect than glass mirrors, showing the face but softening details. Wealthy women might sit while slaves held mirrors, arranged hair, applied cosmetics. The mirror was a luxury item, often beautifully crafted, something to be treasured. It's strange to think that Romans never saw themselves with the clarity we take for granted, that their self-image was literally dimmer, softer around the edges. Perhaps there was mercy in that, or perhaps longing for a clearer view. Either way, they gazed at themselves in these metal surfaces, seeing enough to arrange appearances, to meet their own eyes, to recognize the face looking back as their own. Fact 86. Roman beards. For most of Roman history, men were clean-shaven. It marked civilization. Barbarians wore beards, but Romans met the world smooth-faced, as clean as their architecture. Barbers set up shops throughout Rome, socializing and shaving their customers. But in the 2nd century CE, Emperor Hadrian changed this. He wore a beard in Greek philosophical fashion, and beards became more acceptable, even fashionable. Later emperors followed this trend. By the 3rd century, many Roman men wore beards. Such a small thing, facial hair, yet it marks cultural shifts, changing ideas about what it means to look Roman, look civilized, look powerful. The changing fashion in beards reminds us that Roman culture wasn't static but evolved, absorbed influences, questioned its own assumptions. Even something as personal as whether to shave in the morning reflected empire-wide cultural conversations. Fact 87. The Roman villa. Wealthy Romans built country estates called villas, retreating from urban life to rural peace. These weren't simple farmhouses but elaborate complexes. Residential quarters with beautiful rooms, baths, gardens surrounding agricultural land worked by slaves or tenant farmers. The villa was self-sufficient, producing wine, olive oil, grain, supporting itself while providing luxury for the owner. Here, far from the noise and politics of Rome, one could read, think, entertain friends, enjoy odium, cultivated leisure that Romans considered essential for the good life. Villas dotted the countryside throughout Italy and the provinces. Some survive as ruins, their floors still showing intricate mosaics, their walls hinting at painted frescoes, their location chosen for views or climate or both. They represent another face of Rome, not the public glory but the private retreat, not ambition but contentment, not conquest but cultivation. Fact 88. Roman medicine surgical tools. Archaeological finds from Pompeii and elsewhere have uncovered Roman surgical instruments of surprising sophistication. There were scalpels of different sizes and shapes, hooks and probes, forceps for extracting arrows or grasping tissue, needles for suturing, drills for skull surgery. These weren't crude implements but precision tools, well made from bronze or iron. Roman surgeons performed cataract operations, removed bladder stones, amputated limbs, treated wounds. They understood the importance of cleanliness, boiling instruments, using wine as an antiseptic. They couldn't prevent infection reliably or manage pain beyond wine and opium. Success rates were low by modern standards. But they tried, applying skill and knowledge to alleviate suffering, to repair injury, to preserve life. Those surgical tools, lined up in display cases in museums, speak of hands that wielded them with purpose, of patients who hoped, of the eternal human struggle against suffering and mortality. And so we rest here, surrounded by these small human truths, mirrors that reflected ancient faces, tools that healed ancient wounds, beards that grew or were shaven according to fashion's tide. The intimate details of lives lived fully in their own moment, complete unto themselves, and we realize that all those people, all those Romans, were as real as we are, as present in their moment as we are in ours. And somehow this realization is comforting. We are part of an endless succession of lives, each vivid, each complete, each eventually becoming story, and in this great procession of humanity we find our place and rest. And now we come to the end of our journey through Rome, gathering the final threads, the last stories, bringing our wandering through this ancient world to a gentle close. Fact 89. Roman shoes. Romans wore various types of footwear suited to different purposes. Calcii were enclosed leather shoes, proper for citizens wearing togas. Caligi were the hobnailed sandals of soldiers, sturdy and practical, the nails providing grip on long marches. Solii were simple sandals for indoor wear, slipped off when reclining at dinner. Footwear indicated status. Senators wore special red shoes, emperors purple ones. Shoemakers had their own guild, their own place in Roman economic life. When archaeologists find ancient shoes, preserved by unusual conditions, they're touching something intimate. Leather shaped by someone's foot, worn on journeys we can only imagine, carrying people through their daily rounds 2,000 years ago. Those shoes walked Roman roads, climbed Roman hills, stood in forum crowds, carried their wearers through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments of Roman life. Fact 90. The Roman hearth. Fire was sacred to Romans, and every home had its hearth where fire was kept. This wasn't just for cooking and warmth. The hearth was the spiritual center of the home. The household gods, the Laras and Penates, were honored there. Before meals, a portion might be thrown into the flames as offering. The hearth represented continuity, family, the sacred nature of home itself. When a bride entered her new husband's house, she approached the hearth, symbolizing her entry into a new family, a new set of household gods to honor. The Vestal Virgins kept Rome's eternal flame, but every family kept its own smaller flame, its own connection to the sacred. Fire linked home and temple, personal and public, mortal and divine. It was light in darkness, warmth in cold, and the glowing heart of Roman domestic life. Fact 91. Roman insults. Romans could be remarkably creative with their insults. Political rivals attacked each other verbally with gusto. Cicero was particularly skilled at invective, calling opponents everything from filth of the Senate to far more creative and unprintable things. Graffiti in Pompeii shows ordinary Romans were equally inventive. They insulted bad innkeepers, rivals in love, political candidates they opposed. Latin had a rich vocabulary for mockery, and Romans weren't shy about using it. Yet even in their insults we see their values. Calling someone ungrateful, dishonorable, or a bad citizen stung because honor, gratitude, and civic virtue mattered. The insults that hurt are the ones that challenge identity, and Roman insults often attacked character rather than just hurling random abuse. Even in anger, they revealed what they valued, what they thought a person should be. Fact 92. Roman gardens, sacred groves. Beyond ornamental gardens, Romans maintained sacred groves, areas of trees dedicated to gods or spirits. These were peaceful places, untouched by the plow, where natural growth was allowed. Diana had her sacred groves, as did other deities. People came to these places to pray, to make offerings, to seek the divine in the rustling of leaves and dappled shade. The boundary between cultivated and wild was spiritually significant. Gardens showed human control, but sacred groves acknowledged powers beyond human ordering. In the grove, you entered a space that belonged to the gods, where the normal rules shifted slightly, where the divine felt closer. These groves were refuges. For the spirit, for contemplation, for the sense that the world held mysteries greater than human understanding. Fact 93. Roman fire brigades. Fire was a constant danger in Rome's crowded neighborhoods with their wooden structures and open flames for light and cooking. Augustus created the vigiles, watchmen who served as firefighters. 7 cohorts of vigiles patrolled the city, each responsible for 2 of Rome's 14 districts. They carried buckets, axes, pumps, and blankets soaked in vinegar. When fire broke out, they worked to contain it, sometimes demolishing buildings to create fire breaks. It was dangerous work, often unsuccessful. A major fire could consume entire neighborhoods. The Great Fire of 64 CE during Nero's reign burned for 6 days and destroyed much of the city. Yet the vigiles tried, night after night, responding to alarms, fighting flames, saving what they could. They were Rome's protection against one of its greatest fears: fire spreading unchecked through the densely packed city, consuming homes, lives, history in indiscriminate flames. Fact 94. Roman astronomy. Romans inherited astronomy from the Greeks and Babylonians, tracking the movements of heavenly bodies, recording eclipses, recognizing planets. They knew 5 planets visible to the naked eye and named them for gods: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Names we still use. They understood that the Earth was round, that eclipses followed predictable patterns. Astronomers calculated the solar year's length with remarkable accuracy. The Julian calendar's leap year system, though imperfect, showed sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Romans used the stars for navigation, timing agricultural tasks, casting horoscopes. They believed celestial events influenced earthly affairs. When they looked up at the night sky, they saw order, divine pattern, the movements of gods across the heavens. The same stars we see shone over Rome, and they watched those stars, seeking meaning in their ancient light. Fact 95. The Roman Senate House Curia. The Senate met in a building called the Curia, located in the Forum. The current Curia that still stands was built by Julius Caesar and completed by Augustus, though earlier versions existed before. It was a relatively simple rectangular building, dignified rather than ornate. Inside, senators sat on stepped benches along both long walls facing each other. At the far end, the presiding magistrate sat. The acoustics allowed speeches to be heard throughout. Debates could be lengthy, passionate, filled with rhetoric and appeal to tradition. This was where the fate of Rome was argued, where peace and war were debated, where the republic's business was conducted. Even when emperors held real power, the Senate continued to meet, maintaining the forms if not always the substance of republican government. The Curia still stands in Rome, a shell now, but one that held centuries of debate, ambition, wisdom, and folly. Fact 96. Roman purple dye. Purple dye, particularly Tyrian purple made from sea snails, was extraordinarily expensive in the ancient world. It took thousands of snails to produce a small amount of dye, and the process was complex and smelly. As a result, purple became associated with wealth and power. The emperor wore purple, senators' togas had purple stripes, and gradually purple became so strongly associated with imperial authority that unauthorized use was forbidden. It was a color that meant something: power, wealth, status, authority. When we say born to the purple, meaning royal birth, we're echoing this Roman association. The expense and rarity of true purple meant that the color itself became a symbol, a visual statement that needed no words. To wear purple was to claim rank, and Rome's elite wore their status in that rare, expensive hue extracted from countless tiny sea creatures. Fact 97. Roman seals and signet rings. Important documents were sealed with wax and stamped with a signet ring, creating a unique impression that authenticated the document and its sender. Each person's seal was distinctive, often carved with a personal emblem or image. Breaking someone's seal without authorization was a serious offense. It violated the trust and security that seals represented. Signet rings were both jewelry and tools, beautiful objects with practical purpose. The image pressed into warm wax became a signature, a guarantee, a mark of identity. In a world where literacy wasn't universal, a seal could authorize contracts, commands, letters. The ring was small, but its impression carried weight. Those tiny images pressed into wax secured agreements, validated orders, connected distant correspondence through the unique mark of their seal. Fact 98. Roman street life. The streets of Rome were alive with activity from dawn until well after dark. Shops opened directly onto the street, goods displayed on counters. Merchants called out, advertising their wares. People gathered at public fountains to draw water and gossip. Street food vendors sold hot sausages, pastries, wine. Beggars asked for alms. Musicians performed. Construction crews worked on buildings, the sound of hammers and saws filling the air. Litters carried wealthy citizens, their bearers shouting for people to clear the way. Carts were banned during daylight hours, so nighttime brought the rumble of deliveries on cobblestones. It was noisy, crowded, smelly, vibrant. A city of 1 million people living closely together, their lives overlapping and intersecting in these shared public spaces. To walk Rome's streets was to experience humanity in all its variety, all its noise and energy and endless activity. Fact 99. Roman memory and mnemonics. In a world where books were rare and expensive, memory was crucial. Romans developed sophisticated techniques for memorization. Orators used the method of loci, the memory palace, visualizing a familiar building and placing things to remember in different rooms, then mentally walking through the space to recall information. Students memorized enormous amounts of poetry and literature. The ability to quote Homer, Virgil, or Cicero from memory was expected of educated people. Memory was trained, cultivated, treated as a skill as important as rhetoric or mathematics. What we might write down they held in their minds. Their memories were their libraries, carried with them always. When we struggle to remember a phone number without our devices, it's humbling to think of Romans who could recite entire books from memory, minds trained to hold what ours outsourced to external storage. Fact 100. The Eternal City. Rome was called the Eternal City, Urbs Aeterna, and in a sense it has lived up to that name. The Roman Empire fell, but Rome endured, as a city, as an idea, as an influence that never truly ended. Its language evolved into the Romance languages and pervades English. Its law shapes legal systems worldwide. Its architecture inspires buildings on every continent. Its literature is still read, its history still studied. The question, what would a Roman do, remains relevant in discussions of civic virtue, duty, and governance. Rome fell, yes, but it also transformed, dispersed, propagated itself through all that came after. We live in Rome's shadow, or perhaps in its light, the light of reason, law, order, ambition, and the belief that humans can organize themselves into something greater than tribes, something universal. Rome dreamed of eternity, and in the way ideas and influence can be eternal, perhaps Rome achieved its dream. It speaks to us still, across all the centuries, still teaching, still inspiring, still present in ways both obvious and subtle. Eternal not in stone, but in spirit, in the ongoing story of human civilization that Rome helped shape and that continues in its way to be Roman. And so we come to rest at journey's end. Having walked through 1,000 years of history, through the lives of millions of people now long gone, having seen empire rise and fall, having touched the everyday and the extraordinary, and we find ourselves changed by the journey, quieted by it, humbled by the vast span of human experience. Rome is sleeping now, and so shall we. The ancient city dreams beneath the stars and we dream with it, connected across time by this shared human story, breath slowing, body relaxing, mind drifting like a leaf on the Tiber's current, carried gently toward rest, toward peace, toward the quiet darkness where all stories eventually lead us. Sleep now. Sleep peacefully. Held by history's long embrace. Rome endures, and you are part of its story, part of the endless river of humanity flowing forward through time. Rest now. Rest deeply. In the peace that comes from knowing we are all connected, all part of something larger, all held in the great memory of what has been and what continues. Good night.